Hello and welcome to another edition of The Lighting Guy Show. I'm your host, JP Bedell. The Lighting Guy Show is produced in collaboration with AV Nation, and thanks for tuning in for another episode. Today's guest is Laura Van Zeyl, the publisher and editorial director at Scranton Gillette Communications. We know her from her work at Residential Lighting Magazine and Home Fashion Magazine. Laura and I connected on Twitter years ago, but it was only a couple of weeks ago, actually, at Walking the Floors at Light Fair that we got to meet face-to-face for the first time. And then in there we decided we had to get together via the podcast and recap the show and talk all things lighting in the residential sector. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let's just start right at the top. What was your overall impression of LFI this year? Was it everything you expected? Was there unexpected things? What was your big takeaway?
Well, I think they're about to release it officially that it was the largest light fair in their show history. I think they exceeded 30,000 attendees at the show, and it was visibly even busier than it's been in recent years. It was back at the Javits Center in New York City, which also added to the excitement, I think, since it hasn't been there for several years. And there's such a strong architectural and lighting community locally there in New York. And there's just, that show has not missed a beat in terms of attendance and exhibitor density and quality, and just what's happening in terms of LED lighting technology is keeping it very relevant, and even more relevant than it, maybe historically had been for the residential market or my primary audience of retail lighting showrooms. And I, just running into people on the floor there and who I saw there, that's become a much more important show for that segment to stay on the cutting edge of what is happening in LED.
See, that's interesting. It's one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about. How do you? I feel like the market between what was previously thought of as consumer or decorative or purely sort of on this side of the world, and the spec grade, designer only specified, lighting designers and architects were the only people that would ever specify it over in the other world. I feel like the gap between those two spaces is closing, and it sounds like you caught a similar vibe from the show.
Yeah, I mean, we used to attend that show, waiting for technology to trickle down, like we'd see it there first, but, things weren't evolving as quickly as they certainly are now. I mean, in a matter of months, there can be, new innovations in LED that, make what was cutting edge a few months ago. I mean, it's the electronics industry now, so it's, it's changing at that same pace, and where it's even evident that you can get more for less. That was one of the most remarkable things, I think, even at this particular light fair, was just about everybody had a 2.0 version of, what had been cutting edge 2 years ago, and now has a higher output, more options in terms of color, temperature, and cost less than it did before. And that in categories of products that I cover, recessed lighting, lamping, that would have relevance to the residential market. So, definitely seeing. I mean, there are definitely products there that I can walk on by, have no, right. Might be very interesting, but there's so much there that is relevant to me that I, in 3 days wouldn't have time to even kind of curiously see what's going on. But definitely, like, LED has definitely closed that gap considerably, because it's all important now to know about, because things do find their way into residential fairly quickly at the pace that technology is advancing.
Well, and some of the big incumbent or the big players on the consumer side are moving their way into what was traditionally a lighting-only market. I'm thinking specifically of Apple and Google, who are coming out with Apple's HomeKit and Google's purchase of Nest and their interest in controlling home devices. They are moving into territory that I think was previously held by the Lutrons and the Wattstoppers and the Vantage Controls folks of the past, or Crestrons of the past. So there is this weird tension right now, I think, in the market where users are used to the idea of picking up their smartphone and potentially controlling their Apple TV or controlling their Google Chrome plugin or whatever it might be. I think that expectation is moving toward things like lighting, like temperature control, all those other pieces of automation. So it's a very tenuous time in the market, and I think you got a sense for the pitch of that at the show.
Yes, it's something that I think kind of encapsulates that direction in terms of consumers and how they interface with their lighting specifically, but certainly other aspects of the home too. The Hue product from Philips, and they create a pretty tells the story pretty well video showing how many years does it take to change a light bulb, and showing somebody installing a light bulb in the 1800s, and the room changes, the clothes on the people, the music changes, decades go by, and then their Hue bulb is installed, and suddenly everything is different because now they're in control of their environment in a way that they hadn't been for all of those decades. So that I think that's I would love to see lighting as an industry embrace that more and own that more, because I think that's where it gets really sexy from a consumer standpoint, and suddenly lighting becomes a must-have thing, just like other technologies, and having that control is would be very appealing to customers, and having a very simple interface I think is important as well. Having it be intuitive, having it be on their mobile devices, and that's happening, and I think it's going to continue to happen. And I think that's a big opportunity for my audience and lighting in general to kind of get a piece of that electronic sexiness.
Right. And listen, we saw some of the big players on the show floor, the Philips and the GEs and those big exhibitors. They were going right after the living room. They wanted to make sure that you were aware they had products that filled that gap, which I think is really interesting. And I think that my one concern about the market, if I had to call one out, is my concern is that in the rush to get these kinds of devices connected, that the R&D is going to the sort of connectivity, the interfaces, the things that the bells and whistles, and not necessarily the core things like lighting quality, getting CRI up over 95, getting consistent color temperatures, the things that like lighting geeks are going to really worry about. But I think that we're seeing, to go back to the original point, refinement in all of the product categories seems to be a yearly event, and so we're marching in that direction, and that's all really encouraging things. Did you see anything on the floor on the home automation side or on the residential lighting side specifically that you thought was a wow product, something that should be on everybody's radar?
I think it was more of a slower evolution that I saw overall, but that is important for consumer embrace and adoption of LED. Things like everybody having warmer color temperatures. 2700 Kelvin was the norm across the board, and now you can get that without sacrificing output. Price was another thing that was a big breakthrough in terms of introductions at the market. Philips again had a 2 for $5, Home Depot bulb. I mean, doesn't dim. It's not. It's not as, in terms of light quality, comparable to what you can get now in LED. But now there's no barrier to choosing LED over, say, a CFL alternative for an application where dimming's not important. But dimming now is not quite a non-issue, but it's certainly made, that's something too that's made great strides, and the warmer color temperatures, dimmability, tunability, like that was another thing very incoming on the show floor. People being able to use change their product. Again, maybe it's app-based, maybe it's not, but having that tunability to be able to use the color temperature or warm the environment, to your liking or your needs at that moment. warm dimming, I think, will continue to be incoming. That wasn't quite as widespread or as much of a growth area as I expected it to be at Light Fair, because it seems like, okay, now that's possible. That's something that, certainly when people dim the lights, like they're going for that atmosphere as much as, reducing the light output.
Mm-hmm.
So, and since that's possible to do and do, well in the products that do exist out there, they're just still fairly expensive.
Well, it's a really, really good point you bring up, because I saw some of the dim to warm technology. I saw Mega Man on the lamps level, their booth, where they actually have the lamps that dim that way on a regular triac dimmer, which is great. USAI, the downlight manufacturer, offers a warm glow option where their recessed cans will dim from, I think it's 2700 down to 2200K on a standard dimmer. But you're right. I didn't see as much of that as I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to see more by way of tunable white and more by way of warm glow dimming, which I was a little surprised at that. Now, it's interesting that was an omission, or just not as refined as I thought.
I think that's next. I think that like price is maybe a reason that not a lot of people want to play in that space right now. I know. Satco Products has had their Dimension line out now, I think, for a year. Not all configurations of lamps are available yet. I think when there's a great, A lamp, like that's going to be the suite at an affordable price. But even they're not seeing the sales that they had hoped to of that product. I think still price is an issue. Or even Juno, who I think had the first, or at least the first kind of well-known product in that space with their warm dim recessed, that's still at a premium price point. But I think for some applications like that, why settle for less than that? Like just the fact that you can do that now with LED, and that's not something that you have to compromise anymore. I think that's going to be the next wave that we see, because I do see, whether it's for residential, which still has a lot of sockets open for that next wave that people are clamoring for, but even for hospitality too, because that's an environment, or there are other environments that may have even more of a cost-benefit savings to going with LED. In the meantime, that would benefit from that technology as well.
Sure. Do you get the sense, because you live in this world, when I go to LFI, or it's a pretty lighting-heavy show. At least in New York, it is. You get a lot of specifiers, a lot of architects, lighting designers, engineers, folks that work on the technical side of the industry. But you also go to the show in Dallas. You go to other trade shows around the country that are more geared toward, let's say, the interior design or the home fashion market. Are these still totally different worlds that don't speak to each other, or are you seeing more of a meeting of the minds?
I mean, Dallas is kind of a perfect hybrid between the two right now. I mean, they do have it's primarily decorative product, but it's very heavy percentage of LED now there, even on the decorative side. Some really well done and very interesting decorative products that you could only do in LED because of the slim profile or the form factor, and there are architectural products there as well. So that's kind of where the design and the technology meet, I think, is at that show. And still, that's the primary market for my audience. That's where they go to shop. They are attending Light Fair. Light Fair's not, unless somebody's got a project going right at that moment, they're not necessarily placing an order there. It's that capability. Whereas Dallas, good shows are made or broken by the sales that actually happen on the floor. I was also recently at Luce in Milan, which is also an incredible melding of technology and design. I mean, just the level of design at that show, with many of those companies sort of unfettered by the price point constraints that we are here, just just blew me away in terms of the aesthetics. But then also that was another place where everything was, it coming out in warmer color temperatures. Pretty much everything was LED and integrated LED. And I think that's still, that's still kind of a interesting point as well, is products that are being designed with LED integrated, or products that, or the lamping products that can just go in any existing technology socket.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, because I think in this country versus Europe, for instance, Europeans, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, but tend to design fixtures around the source much more than American or North American manufacturers do. My sense when LED was sort of emerging, and this is changing, but is that we were in a rush to get LED to fit into the form factors we were used to lighting going into, right? Like, well, you have LED, let's put it in downlights, let's put it in troughers, let's put it in strips, let's put it in all the things that we're used to having, right? Some of those form factors LED is great at, under cabinet lighting, down lighting. Some of it is not so great at, like decorative fixtures that are supposed to sit in the corner of your living room, or at least not in a traditional form factor. And that's where I think you get this split in the market between manufacturers who want to integrate LED and where you've got manufacturers who are still clinging to the idea of a replaceable bulb. And I don't know where that's going to go. I mean, the market for bulbs is just too big. Manufacturers can't stay away from it. But where the design aesthetic goes, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of the in-between option, too, is the modules that are replaceable, so that they're almost, but there's not, consistent universal form factors for that. They're usually proprietary to particular manufacturers. So yes, you can change out that module without having to, if there's a failure in the LED, it's not like the entire fixture has to be scrapped or replaced at that point. But until there's more consistency there, I don't think that that's kind of a viable hybrid, but it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think now we're getting into a point in residential LED where, I mean, there's all kinds of predicating issues on that, right? Like the idea that, first of all, electricians have to know what they're looking for. Like the idea that an electrician that has been in the market for 30 years is now going to diagnose what's wrong with an LED fixture that came out 6 months ago and be able to say, oh, it's the board, or it's the driver, or it's the module, or, that's a tall order for anybody. There are a lot of LED experts that wouldn't necessarily know how to diagnose a failure. So you start getting into a lot of these other sort of secondary issues, and where I think this calls for is just what you guys do at Res Lighting, what we try to do here, and what we see across the industry is more education for consumers, make sure that they keep understanding the pitfalls of these things, and as long as there are those pitfalls, we're going to see a strong bulb market, because people are going to want to change a lamp in a socket for as long as they possibly can.
I mean, it does help my audience, my industry, quite a bit, because they are relied upon for their expertise. It's not something a lot of people are comfortable just going to Home Depot and shopping the aisles and making the best choice.
Right.
So I mean, that's in the meantime, that confusion helps somewhat, because they realize that they can benefit from expert advice in order to get the optimum product until it's pretty widespread. But I do feel like consumers are, if not embracing LED technology, like curious about it, or recognizing certain applications, recessed lighting, landscape lighting, where they know that's what they want at the outset, and just which one or what do I need to look for to get the best performance, or what I need it to be able to do in my application.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think that because the price point has gotten to, even for integrated LED products, as the price point, and you brought this up earlier, has gotten to a more manageable place. If you're doing a full-blown renovation of a kitchen or your home, and whatever level of the project is, the cost increase is not so great anymore, where it's not worth the investment to just say, you know what, let's do it in LED. That way I don't have to worry about opening my ceilings for the next 15, 20 years and going in and working on them. That to me seems, I think we've definitely hit that point. And the other consumer level things, the things like light bulbs and lamps, that will evolve over time, and it's going to continue to evolve, and that's a good thing too. We haven't gotten to the it'll be boring when we got to the point where there's no more evolution in the market.
When everybody's bulbs are in place and they're lasting for 20 to 40 years,
right.
Then what do we do?
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's it'll take us so long to do that. We'll pick it back up at the beginning of the cycle again. So one last thing before we talk about or talk about Residential Lighting Magazine a little bit. You mentioned expertise and people calling in experts to talk about their lighting needs in your audience. On the control side, or when they start getting into home automation, are you seeing, or the temperature you take of the market, do you think that that's a growing segment? Do you think people are more interested in how these things talk to each other, work together, or is that still just a little bit ahead for sort of high-end residential, but not necessarily every residential project?
I don't know as far as the consumer demand, but I know among my audience there are more stores that are getting into that space, and I think that has as much to do with there have been some really great aesthetics that have come out. Le Grand Adorn, I think, really kind of, particularly among designers, really shook things up as far as the controls market. Less about the functionality, but having a cool pop-out outlet or something like just gets people engaged with it in a way that okay, it's not just a switch on the wall, or doesn't have to be. So I think that as much as anything kind of spurred that interest, because then that was a line, or Lutron stepping up with their own innovations. I mean, there's a finite number of players in that space that sell through my channel, but there's enough going on that I think that was of interest to more and more stores are wanting to get into that space in a bigger way. And whether that was as much in response to what was available as to what the demand actually is among consumers, but they're there and ready with that product and the knowledge to sell the right product for the right environment.
Yeah, I think all of that is absolutely true, and I think that the expectation is that this is an option, right? And we're gonna need more electricians, AV technicians, folks that can folks that can put all the parts and pieces together at a spec. That will be, and continues to be, I think, a big challenge in the market, is making sure that whoever's specifying the lighting is specifying folks, or parts and pieces that are going to work with whatever control system is going in. Having worked on some of the very high-end residences in New York, I could tell you that it still doesn't happen on the very highest level. Sometimes that level of integration is still missing, and so great integrators, great systems people who understand this are really going to be at the forefront and going to be in demand for going forward as the technology continues to evolve. So before we wrap up, I want for anybody that's not familiar in AV Nation land, tell us a little bit about Residential Lighting Magazine. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what we can expect when we head over to the website or flip open the pages.
So Residential Lighting Magazine has been publishing since 1992 and covering the products in the residential market for lighting. Primary audience are retail lighting showrooms, but we have a fair amount of lighting designers who Spec Residential who also follow us. We do have a fairly robust website with content covering industry news, new products. We have an application designer who answers Q&A questions, Randall Whitehead, who's very popular. We have corresponding e-newsletters on all those subjects as well, and then we're on 7 social media platforms to bring you information wherever people want it.
Excellent, excellent. All right, well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time out tonight to join us and share your take on light fare and all things residential lighting tonight. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of The Lighting Guy Show. The show is produced in conjunction with AV Nation. Come find the rest of our podcasts at avnation.tv. You can follow me on Twitter at James Bedell. Laura, where should folks follow you?
Res Lighting Mag.
At Res Lighting Mag. Thank you very much, and that's our show for tonight.